Welcome to Stories for Sleep, a small, quiet space where you can pause after a long day, let your body soften, and allow your mind to rest in a true sense. Here we do not try to understand too much, and we do not need to remember anything. These stories are told simply to stay with you very gently, very slowly, before sleep arrives. The theme of today's video is the most relaxing truths about emotions that help you fall asleep more easily. Emotions, things that seem invisible, are often what make it hardest for us to close our eyes at night. They remain in the body after a day of living, sometimes without words, without thoughts, just a vague but very real feeling. In this journey, we will look at emotions through a gentler lens, close to the spirit of Carl Gustav Jung. Emotions are not problems to be fixed, but messages that wish to be heard. You do not need to do anything. Just listen and let this slow rhythm of storytelling guide you. If you enjoy gentle stories before sleep, you can subscribe to Stories for Sleep so we may meet again on future nights. And now, let your breathing slow down a little and we begin. Perhaps what exhausts us most at the end of the day is not what we have done, but what still remains inside us. These emotions are not loud. They do not have to be dramatic, but they linger in the chest, in the belly, in the breath, like small waves that have not yet settled. We may have finished our tasks, turned off the lights and lain down, yet inside emotions have not truly come to rest. Carl Gustav Jung believed that human beings are not guided only by reason, but deeply shaped by what has not yet entered consciousness. Emotions are one of the most ancient languages of this unconscious part. They do not come to disturb us. They come to convey information about what we need, what we fear, what we value, and what is asking to be healed. But in modern life, we are often taught to control emotions, suppress them, or judge them as right or wrong. Rarely are we taught how to listen to them slowly, safely, and without judgment. And so when night falls, these unheard emotions become the reason we struggle to sleep lightly, or wake with a vague sense of fatigue. This video is not created to analyze you, not to fix you, and it does not ask you to be more positive. It is a very gentle invitation to see emotions as quiet messengers working for you, even when the way they knock on the door sometimes feels confusing. In this journey, we will explore gentle truths about emotions, how they form in the body before becoming thoughts, how they guide decisions we believe are purely rational, and how, when listened to in the right way, emotions can become a source of living wisdom rather than waves that carry us away. You do not need to remember anything. You do not need to agree with everything. Just stay, listen, and allow this slow rhythm to wash away some of the tension of a long day. If a thought appears and then fades, that is perfectly fine. If your eyelids grow heavy, that too is a natural response. Because sometimes understanding emotions is not meant to wake us up more, but to let us sleep more peacefully. And if you are ready, we will begin from the quietest place emotions live inside your body. Part 1: Emotions as a quiet inner world. Perhaps before we learned to name the world with language, before we could shape thoughts into sentences or memories into stories, emotions were already there. They arrived early, quietly, and honestly. Emotions do not need words to exist. They appear as waves in the body, a slight tightening in the chest, a vague hollow in the belly, a subtle softening of the breath. We often notice them only afterward, once consciousness has found a name. But in truth, emotions always arrive first, opening the way for how we experience the world. Carl Gustav Jung believed that much of human life is not governed by what we think, but by what we feel, without yet understanding. In this sense, emotions are like a quiet inner world, not loud, not showy, yet persistent and deep. They shape whether time feels fast or slow, whether memories feel warm or heavy, and whether the world feels safe or threatening. Two people may live in the same circumstances and feel entirely different things simply because their inner emotional worlds are not the same. Before a memory becomes a clear image in the mind, it was once a feeling. Before a decision is rationalized into, I think it was first whispered by "I feel." And before a relationship is named close or distant, safe or unstable, the nervous system has already evaluated it through heart rate, breath, and the body's tension or softness. Emotions are not merely reactions. They are orientation maps drawn long before we learned how to read them. What is especially important is that emotions do not appear in the mind first. They appear in the body. Anxiety may show up as a gentle contraction in the belly. A small joy may be a deeper breath you barely notice. Sadness may be the heaviness of your eyelids. The body senses first, and consciousness tries to catch up. But because we live in a world that values thinking, we often ignore these early signals, choosing to explain, analyze, and judge, while the body continues whispering in a very ancient language. Jung called these deeper layers the unconscious, a place where emotions do not need to be logical or consistent, yet always have their own reason for being. An emotion may arise not because of the present moment, but because an old memory has been touched. A sense of unease may not come from what is happening now, but from a distant experience the body still remembers. And so emotions can confuse us. We do not know why we feel this way. But not understanding does not mean being wrong. It simply means the message has not yet been heard slowly enough. When emotions are not listened to, they do not disappear. They sink deeper, become more diffuse, and sometimes return at night when consciousness is tired, when the barriers of control grow weaker. This is why many people struggle to sleep, not because they think too much, but because emotions are still awake. They remain in the body, waiting for a safe moment to be felt. And so tonight's journey does not begin with understanding correctly, but with a very gentle invitation. First, allow your body to soften. You do not need to change your emotions. You do not need to make them disappear. Just allow the body to relax a little. Let the shoulders drop. Let the jaw unclench. Let the breath slow and deepen as if you no longer need to go anywhere. When the body begins to feel safe, emotions soften in their own way, not because they are controlled, but because they are finally allowed to rest. Jung believed that healing does not come from forcing the unconscious into silence, but from creating a space safe enough for it to speak. And sleep is one of those spaces where we do not need to defend, prove, or do anything at all. In this moment, you do not need to understand your entire emotional world. Just know that it is there working for you in its own way. It has helped you survive, connect, and seek safety throughout a long day. Now you may allow yourself to rest. Emotions will continue doing their work very quietly as you drift into sleep. And if your eyelids grow heavier, if the words dissolve into sensation, that does not mean you are missing anything. It simply means the quiet inner world has begun to open its door very slowly, very gently, inviting you in to rest. And perhaps what makes emotions hardest to grasp is that they do not follow daytime logic. They do not need right or wrong. They do not need explanations. Emotions exist like weather inside a person, sunny days, cloudy days, and small rains we notice only once we are already wet. We do not blame the sky for rain, yet we often blame ourselves for having emotions. In the modern world, we are taught how to think, analyze, and plan, but rarely how to be with emotions. We are told to be okay, be positive, stop overthinking, while emotions do not need fixing. They need acknowledgement. Jung emphasized that what is rejected by consciousness does not disappear, but continues to live in the unconscious, sometimes as tension, anxiety, or a nameless fatigue. Emotions are quiet, but patient. If they are not heard during the day, they wait for the night. When the lights go out, when social roles fall away, when you lie still in the dark, the inner world begins to move. That is why many people feel everything rush in at bedtime. Not because they are weak, but because they no longer have to be strong. Jung saw emotions as messengers. Each emotion carries information about needs, boundaries, memories, or changes that want to happen. But these messengers do not speak in words. They speak in a faster heartbeat, shallower breath, a hollow or warmly vague feeling. And when we do not understand this language, we mistake emotions for problems to solve rather than information to understand. There is something very important that is often overlooked. Emotions do not require immediate action. Sadness does not need you to do anything tonight. Anxiety does not need to be solved now. Unease does not need an answer. In rest, the safest thing you can offer emotions is simply permission to be there. As you lie still, the space around you grows quiet, and the body shifts from vigilance to recovery. The parasympathetic nervous system activates. Heart rate slows. Muscles soften, and in this context, emotions change how they appear. They no longer shout, they whisper, and sometimes being heard at that whisper is enough for them to complete their task. Jung believed that psychological wholeness does not come from living only in light, but from accepting darkness, as well not to drown in it, but to understand it as part of being human. Difficult emotions are not enemies of sleep. They are simply parts that have not yet been held long enough. And night, with its natural slowness, is the most suitable time for that to happen. So if while listening you notice an emotion rising very gently, you do not need to name it. You do not need to analyze it. Just acknowledge, this is how I feel. Then let the breath continue in and out, like small waves on the shore. Emotions do not need guarding. They know how to regulate themselves when they are not resisted. And if consciousness begins to fade, if words dissolve, if you no longer remember where you are in the story, that is not a failure of attention. It is a success of safety. The quiet inner world has received the signal, now you may rest. Emotions remain. They will continue their work, but you do not need to anymore. Tonight, simply let the body lie still. Let the breath lead the way, and allow sleep to arrive as something entirely natural. Part 2. Emotions are living signals, not passing moods. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, emotions have never been meaningless, fleeting waves. They are not temporary moods that appear and disappear at random, but living signals formed quietly and deeply within the nervous system memory, and the predictions the brain is constantly making in order to keep a human being safe in a vast and unpredictable world. If we listen slowly enough, we begin to notice that each emotion is like an inner news report. It is not loud, it is not sensational, yet it carries important information. Emotions do not arise from nothing. They are woven from past experiences, from moments when we were wounded or protected, from memories that still carry warmth or have not yet fully closed. The brain does not respond only to the present. It compares the present with the past and anticipates the future, and emotion is the result of that comparison. Jung believed that emotion is one of the most important bridges connecting consciousness and the unconscious. When you sense that something is not quite right but cannot yet explain it in words, it is often the unconscious sending a signal upward. A vague worry, a heaviness in the chest, or a small but persistent sense of joy, all are ways the inner system is whispering, pay attention. What is fascinating is that emotions do not merely signal, they shape attention itself. When fear is present, attention sharpens and narrows, focusing on danger. When safety is felt, attention softens and widens, allowing other possibilities to appear. When sadness arises, the world slows down. When joy is present, time seems to move more quickly. Emotions are not just something we have, they are the lens through which we see. Every emotion has a survival function. Fear protects us from danger. Anger alerts us to violated boundaries. Sadness allows us to pause, withdraw, and heal. Joy and love create connection, helping us not feel alone. Even emotions labeled negative were not created to harm us. They exist to keep us alive, physically and psychologically. The problem is not emotion itself, but how we misunderstand it. When emotions are treated as passing states that must be silenced, we lose the ability to learn from ourselves. When we try to control or deny emotion, we push it deeper into the unconscious, where it does not disappear, but changes form into tension, exhaustion, insomnia, or a nameless sense of emptiness. Jung emphasized that what is not made conscious returns as fate. Emotions are no different. When listened to properly, they become guides. When ignored, they turn into invisible forces that shape behavior without our understanding why. Understanding emotion does not make a person weaker. On the contrary, it deepens experience and adds richness to familiar moments. On a quiet evening, when you are alone or lying down preparing to sleep, emotions often become most noticeable. Not because night makes things worse, but because night removes noise. When social roles pause and the outside world grows quiet, inner signals finally have space to be heard. And if we do not rush to push them away, emotions naturally regulate themselves like ocean waves settling when the wind stops. Understanding emotion does not require complex analysis. Sometimes it is enough to notice, this feeling is trying to tell me something. No immediate answer is required. No immediate action is needed. Simply allowing the emotion to exist within the safety of gentle attention is enough. In that moment, emotion shifts from a raw reaction into meaningful information. And when emotion is seen as a living signal rather than an intruder, the inner conflict softens. Life slows down. Breathing deepens. Ordinary experiences, a long breath, an old memory, a quiet evening gain depth. Not because the world has changed, but because our way of sensing it has. As you prepare for sleep, this is the most important thing to remember. Emotions do not need to be fixed. They only need to be heard. When listened to gently and long enough, they naturally return to balance, and the body understands that it is time to rest. When we view emotions as living signals, we also begin to see something essential. Emotions never arrive alone. They always come with context, personal history, and stories written very early in the unconscious. Jung called these complexes clusters, where memory, emotion, and inner imagery intertwine. A strong emotional reaction often occurs not because the present is overwhelming, but because it touches a structure that has existed for a long time within. This is why we sometimes react more intensely than seems necessary. Not because we are weak, but because the present signal has activated an old emotional memory. The body does not clearly distinguish between now and then. For the nervous system, emotion is always real and always present. Understanding this helps reduce self-blame when emotions feel too strong, too fast, or difficult to control. Emotions also do not exist separately from the body. They flow through heart rate, breath, muscle tone, skin temperature. Before you think I am sad, the body has already slowed. Before you say I am anxious, the stomach has already tightened. Jung believed that the unconscious expresses itself first through images and sensations, not words. So when we try to think positively while ignoring bodily signals, we miss the most honest layer of emotion. With gentle attention, we can notice that emotions have their own rhythm. They rise, peak, and recede like waves. What exhausts us is not emotion itself, but resistance, trying to hold it or push it away. When emotion is allowed to exist safely, the nervous system adjusts automatically. This is not magic, it is natural physiology. At night, as light softens and the outside world quiets, emotions often become clearer. This is why many people feel more sadness, worry, or sensitivity before sleep. But seen differently, this is also the best time for emotional processing. With fewer demands and no need for immediate reaction, emotions can move through without interruption. Jung believed healing does not come from eliminating emotion, but from integrating it into consciousness. When an emotion is understood, it loses chaos. When placed in context, it gains limits. We are no longer carried away by it, but able to stand beside it as part of the inner flow of life. Seen this way, everyday moments change meaning. A little sadness is no longer failure. A little worry is no longer the enemy. Emptiness may simply be an invitation to pause. When emotions are viewed as messengers rather than invaders, we read their message instead of reacting to their intensity. And as night falls, as your body moves towards sleep, the most comforting thing to remember is this: you do not need to resolve every emotion tonight. Emotions do not demand answers in the dark. They only need acknowledgement. That alone is enough for the nervous system to lower its guard. In that relaxed state, emotions stop being alarms and become a gentle background tone of inner life. They do not push or pull. They simply exist quietly like breath. And when emotions are allowed to flow naturally, sleep arrives not as escape, but as a soft continuation of life itself. Part 3. Or small joys, and how the brain learns through repetition. There are rare moments in life when we suddenly feel smaller, not in weakness, but in another way the ego steps back and the world opens wider. This may happen while standing before a boundless night sea, gazing at a sky full of stars, listening to music that quiets the heart, or touching a meaning greater than oneself. Jung called these experiences the numinous moments when the human being is no longer the center but part of something larger. R is not loud. It does not stimulate or demand reaction. It brings deep stillness. When the ego temporarily shrinks, everyday anxieties lose weight. The brain, accustomed to survival mode, is allowed to rest. In that moment, the nervous system does not need defense, only presence. But such moments are rare. And if we wait only for them, we miss something vital. The human brain does not learn primarily from rare peaks, but from small repetitions. Jung emphasized that the unconscious does not change through grand promises, but through lived experiences repeated over time. What shapes emotional life is not brilliance, but consistency. This is where small joys appear. A warm cup of tea in a quiet evening, soft light in a familiar room, the relief of lying down after a long day, a deep breath taken without obligation. These are easy to overlook because they lack drama, but to the nervous system they are essential. Each small joy is a signal of safety. Repeated often enough, the brain learns the world can be trusted. The brain does not measure importance by size, but by frequency. A small joy, repeated daily, regulates emotion more deeply than a rare moment of happiness. Like a forest path, it is not the strongest step that creates the trail, but the most repeated one. Emotion forms neural pathways the same way. Jung believed healing comes not from sudden change, but from refamiliarization with safety. When the brain repeatedly encounters moderate, non-overstimulating comfort, it learns to lower vigilance. From that state, sleep becomes easier, deeper, more natural. This explains why noticing good things is a skill, not forced positivity. Forcing positive thinking while the body is tense increases inner conflict. The brain does not trust commands, it trusts experience. When attention gently returns to what feels safe and pleasant, learning happens without resistance. Attention, as Jung understood it, is not control, it is choosing where the light of awareness rests. The light does not need to illuminate everything. It only needs to notice that right now something is not threatening. A calm feeling, a quiet moment, a breath moving freely. Repeated gently and consistently, the brain changes how it predicts the future. It stops always preparing for danger. It learns there are moments without defense. And in those moments, emotion softens thoughts, slow and sleep finds space. Awe reminds us we are not alone in the vast universe. Small joys remind us we are safe in daily life. Repetition teaches the brain both truths quietly, steadily. Right now, as you listen, you do not need to seek anything special. Simply noticing that you are lying down, breathing evenly, hearing a slow voice is already a small joy. And if this repeats night after night, your brain will learn something essential. This is a safe time to rest. From that, safety sleep arrives not as a goal, but as a natural consequence of settling. Part 4. When emotions are named, the brain begins to regulate. From Jung's perspective, unnamed emotion is like dense inner fog. It lacks shape and boundary, easily spreading to cover all experience. When emotion remains vague, it often feels heavier than it truly is, not because it is large, but because the mind does not know where to place it. An unnamed sadness can become prolonged emptiness. Unidentified anxiety can turn into bodily tension and exhaustion. Jung warned that what is not made conscious returns as fate. When emotion is unnamed, it sinks into the unconscious, merging with old memories and early survival patterns. It becomes like a dark room, not because it is dangerous, but because the light is off. When we gently name emotion, I feel sad, I feel anxious, I feel disappointed, something subtle happens in the brain. The nervous system shifts from reaction to regulation. Language areas activate, while alarm centers soften. Naming emotion tells the brain the threat has been identified, and once identified, the body can relax. Naming does not erase emotion. For Jung, understanding was never elimination, but coexistence. Naming creates a small distance between I and what I feel, not separation, but perspective. Emotion becomes part of a larger inner landscape, rather than consuming the self. Emotions are rarely single-layered. Anger may hide fear. Apathy may conceal exhaustion. Emptiness may hold grief. Jung described this layered nature of psyche. Staying gently with emotion allows layers to reveal themselves, and each recognition brings relief. Naming need not be perfect. The brain does not require precision, only sincerity. Even saying something feels off signals safety. It says someone is here paying attention. Equally important is being heard without judgment by others or by oneself. When emotion is received without correction or evaluation, the nervous system leaves defense mode. Breathing slows. The heart steadies. Emotion shifts from chaos into felt movement. Jung believed healing comes not from eliminating darkness, but from bringing gentle light closer. Naming emotion is that gentle light, not blinding, not forceful, just enough to see we are not lost. At night, when the world quiets, this becomes easiest. No analysis needed, no digging into the past. Simply whisper inwardly, "This is what I feel right now," and let it breathe with you. When emotion is named, the brain no longer guards in the dark. It rests. Breath slows. Sleep returns not as something to chase, but as a reflex of restored safety. Right now, you need do nothing more. If emotion is present, let it have a name or simply a feeling. That is enough for the nervous system to soften and guide you gently into sleep. And from there, you may drift, carrying the quiet sense that inside you everything has been seen and nothing is in a hurry anymore. Part 5. Difficult emotions. Boredom, suppression, and hope. There are emotions that are not loud, not explosive, not immediately frightening. They are quieter, more subtle, and because of that, they are often overlooked for much longer. Boredom, emotional suppression, and hope are emotions like this. They are not storms, but thick mist. They do not knock us down in an instant, yet they can cause us to lose our way if we do not realize where we are. From Carl Jung's perspective, these difficult emotions are not mistakes of the mind. They are messages from a deeper part of the self, a part always trying to preserve meaning and direction in life. When boredom appears, it does not come to punish us. It arrives as a quiet signal that something in the current rhythm of life no longer aligns with the inner self. It may be work that no longer nourishes a relationship that has lost its energy, or simply that we have drifted too far from values that once made us feel alive. Boredom, therefore, is not laziness or weakness. It is a sign of misalignment. Just as the body aches when posture is wrong, the mind tires when life falls out of rhythm. Yet because society often glorifies busyness and forward motion, many people learn to push boredom down instead of listening to it. And when it is not heard, boredom does not disappear. It sinks deeper, blending into the emotional background, turning everything gray and dull. Emotional suppression works in a similar way. It is rarely a conscious decision. More often, it is a survival strategy learned very early. There are times in life when expressing emotion is not safe, and so the nervous system learns to hold back, to lock things away, to keep emotions from rising to the surface. That strategy may once have helped us survive, helped us move through difficult periods. But when it becomes a long-term habit, suppression quietly drains inner energy. Jung called this the cost of becoming disconnected from oneself. The energy required to keep emotions submerged is the same energy needed for creativity, vitality, and full presence. For this reason, people who suppress a lot are not necessarily weak. They are often people who have grown very accustomed to holding themselves together. They feel tired without knowing why, tense without knowing from where, and find it difficult to relax even when everything is done. What needs to be whispered here is this: acknowledging emotion does not mean losing control. This is a very common fear. Many believe that if they allow themselves to feel sadness, anger, or disappointment, they will be overwhelmed. But in reality, what makes emotions frightening is not acknowledgement, it is isolation. An emotion that is seen has boundaries. An emotion that is abandoned does not. When we allow ourselves to whisper, "I am bored," or "I am tired of holding too much," the nervous system does not collapse. On the contrary, it often softens because it no longer has to work alone in the dark. Jung believed that darkness itself is not dangerous. What is dangerous is darkness that remains unconscious. Among these difficult emotions, hope appears as a very special current. Hope is not certainty that everything will be fine. It is not blind reassurance. In depth psychology, hope is an emotion oriented toward the future, allowing people to keep moving even when the path is unclear. It does not erase pain, but it creates space, so pain does not become the entire story. Hope can be very small. Sometimes it is simply the thought, "Perhaps I don't need to solve everything tonight," or "Tomorrow might be a little lighter." These small seeds of hope are quiet, but they are enough to keep the nervous system from freezing in despair. In the moments before sleep, when consciousness begins to loosen its grip, difficult emotions often become clearer. Not to disturb you, but because this is the safest time for them to be felt. And you do not need to process them now. No analysis, no solutions. Just allow them to be present like tired guests at the end of the day. You can whisper to yourself, "I see you," to boredom, to exhaustion, and even to the fragile hope resting beneath that fatigue. Nothing more is required, only presence. And when you do this, you may notice something gentle, difficult. Emotions do not come to destroy your sleep. They come to be set down. When set down, the body no longer needs to carry them into dreams as burdens. Sleep can once again arrive, as it naturally does, unforced, without effort. Right now, if you are listening to these words, you have already done enough. Let the nervous system and sleep receive the rest. There is something subtle about difficult emotions. They speak not only of the present, but of what once mattered deeply. Jung believed no emotion appears randomly. Even boredom is the trace of a desire that was once alive. We can only feel bored with something if at some point we once hoped, invested, or cared deeply about it. Boredom then is not proof of emptiness, but evidence of having once cared very much. Seen this way, boredom is no longer an enemy. It becomes a quiet reminder that some inner direction may need gentle adjustment, not through hurried action, but through slow listening. At night, when outer noise fades, boredom often becomes clearer, not to accuse, but to ask, "What in my life no longer nourishes me?" Emotional suppression tells a similar story. People rarely suppress because they do not know what they feel. More often, there was a time when expressing emotion was not welcomed or protected. The nervous system learned restraint as an intelligent reflex. And like all survival reflexes, it does not disappear when circumstances change unless it is recognized. Jung described this as a split between the conscious ego and the shadow. What is suppressed does not vanish. It lives deeper, influencing sleep dreams and the sense of safety. Many people do not understand why they cannot sleep even when the day held no major events. Yet the body is still carrying emotions that have not been set down. And night is when the body asks for rest from that effort. Acknowledging emotion then is not digging or making a big deal. It is like opening a door slightly to let air circulate. You do not need to enter the room, only to unlock it. The nervous system is highly sensitive to such signals. When it senses that emotions can be seen without judgment, vigilance begins to lower. Hope in this context is not the opposite of boredom or suppression. It does not erase them. Hope is simply the ability to imagine that the present experience is not the final chapter. Sometimes hope is not a bright future, but the quiet sense that tonight will pass and the body can rest safely. Jung believed hope is linked to the capacity to tolerate uncertainty. A mind that demands certainty easily falls into despair when the future cannot be controlled. But a mind that accepts that not everything must be solved immediately has room to breathe. Sleep is one of those spaces. Before sleep, you do not need to hope that all problems will be resolved, only that you are allowed to rest, even while things remain unclear. That is not giving up. It is deep trust in the inner system, body, brain, unconscious, continuing its work in its own way, even when you are not watching. If right now you notice a bit of boredom, a bit of fatigue from holding too much, and a very small bit of hope, allow all three to be present. No need to organize them, no need to prioritize one over another. Just let them lie still, like objects set down after a long day. You do not need to fully understand your emotions in order to sleep. You only need to allow them not to be chased away. And when that happens, sleep often arrives not as a reward, but as the natural response of a nervous system that has finally been allowed to rest. Right now, you may let your eyes close, your breath slow, and know this: the difficult emotions have been seen. Let the night finish the rest of its work. Part 6. Body, gut, heart, and emotions as one system there is a common misunderstanding. In modern life, we believe emotions live in the mind, and the body merely suffers the consequences. But if we listen more deeply, the opposite becomes clear. Emotions do not originate in thought, they arise from the body, and only afterward are interpreted by the mind. Jung emphasized that psyche and body are not separate. They are two expressions of the same living stream. The gut, heart, and brain do not function independently. They are in constant dialogue, a silent conversation unfolding day and night. When the gut tightens, the heart races and the breath becomes shallow. The brain receives a message that something is wrong even without a clear reason. And when the brain interprets that message as anxiety, sadness, or irritability, we often blame ourselves for bad emotions, instead of recognizing that the body spoke first. Hunger, exhaustion, and lack of sleep are not just physical states. They thin the nervous system's margin of safety. When energy is low, the brain prioritizes survival over nuance. A feeling that might have been a small ripple becomes intense, not because you are weak, but because the body lacks resources to regulate. Self-blame in these moments only tightens the stress loop. Jung did not view emotions as moral issues. He did not ask whether an emotion was right or wrong, but where it came from and what it was trying to protect. Seen this way, anger may signal violated boundaries, sadness may reflect loss, and anxiety may be an alarm from an overloaded system. No emotion is a failure, only biological responses attempting to keep you safe. Therefore, emotional care does not begin with thinking positively, but with basics: eating enough, sleeping enough, breathing deeply, allowing the body to rest. When the body is cared for, emotions soften naturally. No forcing, no fixing. A nourished nervous system finds balance on its own. Before sleep, you do not need to understand every emotion. Just ask the body one simple question: am I tired? If the answer is yes, rest itself is healing. In the quiet darkness of night, when you allow the body to be set down emotions, find a place to lie as well. One of Jung's most gentle gifts was seeing the body as part of the soul's life, not a crude shell to overcome. For him, the body is where the unconscious speaks in its oldest language: heartbeat, breath, tension, and release. These languages do not need immediate translation. They only need listening. The gut in particular is a silent emotional center. It contains millions of neurons, enough to function as a second brain. When the gut is unsettled, the mind rarely feels at peace. Sensations like fluttering tightness or heaviness are not metaphors, they are real signals. When prolonged, the brain learns to live in vigilance, making emotions more sensitive to small changes. The heart works the same way. Heart rhythm does not only reflect emotion, it shapes it. A fast, irregular heartbeat signals danger to the brain. A slow, steady rhythm signals safety. This is why a few deep breaths before sleep can calm an entire day of emotional turbulence. Modern life often separates emotions from the body's basic needs. We try to stay calm when hungry, focus when exhausted, sleep well while the nervous system is still sounding alarms. But the gut-heart-brain system does not respond to moral commands. It responds to biology, and biology responds to care, not criticism. Jung called this disconnection alienation from inner nature. When we forget we are organisms before personalities, emotions become personal failures. Yet, seen at the root, many intense emotions are simply signs of a body that has been braced too long. That is why caring for the body before sleep is not secondary, it is central to emotional regulation. Soft light, a non-strained posture, a slower breath, permission not to be okay immediately. These send direct signals to the nervous system. The danger has passed, at least for tonight. When the body receives enough safety signals, emotions reorganize themselves, not through logic but through biological rhythm. Emotions that once demanded attention can settle not because they were solved, but because they no longer need to shout. Right now, if your body feels heavy, warm, or simply still, notice this. You do not need to do anything more. The body is working for you. The gut is slowing. The heart is finding its rhythm. The brain is learning it can let go. And when these systems agree, emotions stop resisting. They rest just like you, not because sleep is forced, but because safety is finally sufficient. Part 7. Emotions. As the brain's interpretation of signals, there is something crucial that is often overlooked. Emotions are not direct events, they are interpretations. Before you feel fear, joy, excitement, or calm, your body has already sent raw signals. Heart rate faster or slower, breath shallow or deep, muscles tense or soft. The brain receives these signals and asks a silent question: what does this mean? And from that question, emotion is born. Jung believed the human mind is constantly creating meaning. The brain dislikes emptiness. It does not wait for full information before concluding. It predicts continuously based on memory, past experience, and current context. The same bodily reaction, a racing heart, warmth in the belly, quick breath, may be interpreted as fear in one situation and excitement in another. The difference lies not in the body, but in the story the brain tells. When faced with the unknown, the brain searches its memory for familiar patterns. If this sensation once meant danger, it is labeled anxiety. If it once meant pleasure, it becomes anticipation. And once named, the brain believes its own story and adjusts the entire emotional experience accordingly. Jung called this the power of inner symbols. Emotion does not merely reflect reality, it reflects how we have learned to understand reality. That is why changing emotion does not always require changing circumstances. Sometimes it requires only a slight shift in interpretation. But such a shift does not come from rational argument. You cannot tell the body, "Don't worry," and expect it to obey. The body does not understand force, it understands rhythm. A slower heartbeat tells the brain safety is increasing. A deeper breath says there is no urgency. A softer posture says there is no need to fight or flee. When these signals change, the brain tells a different story. This is not self-deception. Jung did not advocate denying emotion. He believed that understanding emotion as interpretation makes us more humble toward it. We are not swept away, nor do we suppress. We begin to see emotion as a message that can be adjusted, not a command to obey. Before sleep, this understanding matters deeply. At night, the brain easily returns to old predictions. An unfamiliar heartbeat may be interpreted as anxiety. A passing thought may be magnified into unease. But when you recognize this is the brain assigning meaning to bodily signals, a small but precious distance appears. That distance is enough to remove the need to react. You do not need to fix emotion. You only need to stay with the body, with the breath, with the contact of your back on the bed, the blanket on your skin. These signals tell a different story. There is nothing to do right now. As the brain receives enough of these signals, its narrative softens from vigilance to ease, from tension to settling. Not because you forced silence, but because you offered new information. Jung suggested that we suffer not from emotion itself, but from believing absolutely in our first interpretation. The brain chooses familiar paths, not optimal truth, because familiarity feels safer. A chest sensation once linked to loss becomes sadness. Once linked to danger becomes fear. Once named, the nervous system acts as if the label is reality. Yet Jung emphasized that between stimulus and response lies a subtle space. That space is often tiny, barely noticeable, but it is where inner freedom exists. When we see emotion as interpretation, we enter that space naturally. At night, this space is especially fragile. When tired, the brain lacks energy to reassess predictions. It falls back on old stories. A slight bodily change can trigger a full narrative, not because something is wrong, but because the brain is doing its familiar job. Understanding this, we do not fight the brain. We slow the interpretation, and the most effective way to slow it is through the body. A breath slightly longer, a rhythm slightly steadier, a posture slightly softer. These small shifts are the language the brain understands best. They say there is no threat right now. Jung believed the unconscious speaks not in logic, but in image, sensation, and rhythm. By changing bodily rhythm, you speak directly to the deepest layers of the mind. You do not argue with emotion, you change the context so emotion changes its tone. Not every emotion needs fixing. Some only need correct recognition. Instead of asking, "How do I stop feeling this?" you might gently ask, "What signal is my brain interpreting this way?" That question alone softens the emotional experience. You are no longer dissolved inside emotion. You stand beside it, observe it, and in that observation, the brain realizes it does not need to amplify. Before sleep, this matters most. Sleep does not come from forcing calm, but from feeling safe in one's body. When the brain no longer interprets every signal as warning, it allows rest. Right now, as you listen, notice what story your body is telling. No need to change it. Just listen. Perhaps it is a story of fatigue. Perhaps a story of wanting to stop. Neither requires action, only acknowledgement. Emotion is not the enemy of sleep. Sometimes the brain simply tells its story too loudly. When you lower the volume with breath, posture, and gentle presence, the story slows. And in that slowing, sleep does not need invitation. It arrives on its own, a very old, very deep reflex that has lived within you for a long time. Part 8. Emotions as contagious, connective, and socially formed. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, emotions have never been purely individual phenomena. They do not arise inside a person and then remain sealed there. They are always in motion, spreading, resonating, and echoing within a wider field, the field of relationships, community, culture, and collective history. When we speak of emotional contagion, we are touching a very deep layer of the human psyche, the collective unconscious, where emotional rhythms are shared without the need for explanation. You may have experienced this before walking into a room and immediately feeling the atmosphere even before anyone speaks. It might be a vague tension or a warmth that is difficult to name. Jung believed this was not imagination. It is the way your unconscious reads emotional signals, already circulating the breathing patterns of others, how they move, whether their eyes avoid or open the pauses between their words. Emotion, in this sense, is a language far older than speech. Voice gaze, facial expression, signals that seem small are in fact the primary channels of social emotion. A slow, low voice can calm another person's nervous system, even if the words themselves are ordinary. A tense look can trigger defensiveness in someone else, even without open conflict. Our brains are wired to mirror and synchronize heart rates, shift in response to those nearby. Breathing unconsciously slows when we hear someone else breathing slowly. This is how humans have stayed connected and survived together for tens of thousands of years. Jung understood this not only as biology, but as the expression of a deeper need, the need to belong. Emotions spread because we are not designed to exist alone. Shared sadness becomes lighter. Reflected joy becomes deeper. Even fear, when recognized as collective, becomes more bearable. The collective unconscious functions like a shared emotional field, where each individual both transmits and receives signals. Culture acts as a filter and a frame for this emotional flow. Some cultures encourage open emotional expression. Others value restraint and silence. This does not make emotions stronger or weaker, only different in surface form. Sadness in one culture may be expressed in tears. In another, it may be hidden behind politeness and distance. Jung believed that misunderstanding emotional context often leads to misunderstanding people themselves. For this reason, emotional literacy is not merely about knowing more words, but about sensing more finely. When you can distinguish between sadness, longing, loneliness, emptiness, or mental fatigue, you expand your inner map. And with that map, you begin to recognize similar nuances in others. Understanding arises not from analysis, but from emotional resonance being tuned to the right frequency. Before sleep, this becomes especially important. The emotions of the day are not all yours. Many are residues absorbed from others, from news, from the social spaces you moved through. As you lie down, the nervous system begins to withdraw from that shared emotional field. This is the moment when you can gently return emotions that do not belong to your core self. Nothing complicated is required, only the recognition. Some of these feelings come from connection, not from my deepest center. Jung believed that understanding emotion, as both personal and collective, helps us feel less alone with our inner life. You are not strange for feeling this way. You are simply resonating with the world around you in a very human way. And when this is understood, emotions no longer feel like burdens to carry alone, but like bridges connecting you to the living movement of life everywhere. As you listen now, notice whether your emotions are slowing. Perhaps you feel less need to react, less need to understand everything. You may sense that you are being held in a quieter, safer space. And within that space, emotions are allowed to rest just as you are about to do. At an even deeper level, Jung believed emotions spread not only through immediate biological signals, but through shared symbols. A familiar song, a collective ritual, an ancient story retold, all are containers of communal emotion. When you touch them, you are not only feeling your own emotion, but the emotional memory of many generations before you. That is why some moments move us without explanation, as if the feeling does not fully belong to the present. In the collective unconscious, the boundary between I and we is not always clear. A fear circulating in society can make millions more guarded even after the danger has passed. Conversely, a strong sense of safety carried through calm voices, stable rhythms, trustworthy relationships can soothe an entire tense community. Jung believed a healthy society is not one without negative emotion, but one that can regulate collective emotion instead of letting it spread unconsciously. Emotional contagion also explains why we feel drained after being with an anxious person or lighter beside someone at peace. Human nervous systems are like instruments tuned to the same key. When close enough, they naturally harmonize. This is not weakness, it is the foundation of empathy. But without awareness, we may carry home emotions that are not ours, and when night comes, the body may still not be able to rest. For this reason, gently withdrawing from the social emotional field before sleep is an act of kindness toward yourself. You might imagine loosening the emotional threads connecting you to the outside world, not cutting them, but releasing them with gratitude. Jung described this as returning to the center of the self, where the individual can rebalance after a day of participation in the collective. Emotional language then becomes an inner compass in complex social spaces. When you can tell which worries are yours and which you have absorbed, you stop overreacting. You learn to stand still while collective emotion rushes past, not resisting it, but not being swept away. Jung emphasized that maturity does not mean separating from society, but becoming conscious of how one participates in the shared emotional field. When we recognize resonance, we gain choice. There are times to open and connect, and times to close and recover. Sleep is the most natural moment for this closing. As you lie down, the social world recedes. Voices, gazes, and external rhythms fade. What remains is your own breath, your own heartbeat. Here, emotions no longer need to communicate or spread. They return to their simplest form, gentle bodily signals, and slowly settle. And perhaps in that settling you may sense something simple and profound. You do not need to carry the whole world into sleep. The world will still be there when you wake. For now, you may allow yourself to rest not only from thought, but from the emotional currents that have flowed through you all day long. Part 9. Emotions through dreams, memory, art, and animals. When night falls and consciousness loosens its grip, emotions find a familiar space to continue their journey. Dreams. For Carl Gustav Jung, dreams are not meaningless chaos, but the natural language of the deep mind, where emotions speak through images, symbols, and rhythm. In dreams, the brain does not merely rest. It quietly rehearses emotions that were not fully understood. While awake, unnamed anxieties, unfinished joys, conflicts, pushed into the unconscious. Each dream is like a safe laboratory where emotions can be tested without real-world consequences. We may face fear, experience loss, or revisit old memories, all within a space that demands no action. Jung believed this process allows the psyche to integrate emotion so that upon waking, we are less overwhelmed by it. This is why, after deep sleep, emotions often feel softer, less sharp, even though external problems remain. Memory, in this view, is not a set of fixed boxes stored intact in the brain. Each time we remember, memory is recreated, colored by present emotion. A sad memory may soften when we feel safe. A joyful memory may carry longing when we are tired. Emotion does not merely accompany memory, it reshapes memory every time they meet. Jung saw this as proof that the psyche does not live in a frozen past, but in an ongoing dialogue between what was and what is. Art, especially music and scent, provides the shortest path for emotion, straight into the unconscious. A slow melody can calm the heart before we notice. A familiar scent can return us to an old room, a distant afternoon, in a single breath. Jung called these symbolic gateways. They require no explanation, no analysis. Emotion is activated directly in its purest form, as it existed before we learned to name it. This is why art heals not through logic, but through resonance. When we listen to sad music while sad, we do not feel weaker, we feel understood. Emotion is mirrored, shared, and thus lightened. Jung believed art touches the collective unconscious, where humanity's fundamental emotions are preserved across generations, giving art its timeless power. In the animal world, we see that emotion is not uniquely human. Without abstract language, animals still clearly express fear, attachment, joy, and tension. A dog seeks a familiar gaze when anxious. A flock of birds reacts together to danger. These emotions are bound to survival and social life, showing that emotion is an ancient system long predating conceptual thought. Jung saw here a deep continuity between humans and nature. Emotion is not something to transcend, but a flow of information that helps life adapt. When we listen to our emotions with curiosity instead of judgment, we return to a very old intelligence, the intelligence of life itself. At night, dreams, memory, music, and imagery all work together quietly, without demand, guiding the nervous system back toward balance. This may be why before sleep we do not need to fully understand our emotions. We only need to allow them to move, as nature does. In the gentle darkness of night, emotions do not need to be right or wrong. They only need to exist, and gradually, like all natural things, they find their own rhythm of rest. If we listen more closely, we notice emotions not only in big moments, but in tiny details. The way we touch a familiar object, the way a melody makes eyelids heavy, the way a dream image leaves an echo the next morning. Jung believed the unconscious communicates not through words, but through emotional experience. Thus, dreams need no clear logic art, no explanation memory, no perfect accuracy. What matters is not what happened, but which emotion was awakened. In the half-awake, half-dreaming state, when consciousness tires and releases control, emotions reorganize themselves. Scattered dream images, wordless music, and nameless sensations are the brain's way of clearing inner space. It loosens emotional knots, not by confrontation, but by gentle repetition, like waves smoothing stone over time. Jung called this the psyche's natural self-regulation. No force is required, just time and safety. As the body heals a scratch, the mind softens emotion when given space. This is why deep sleep often leaves us breathing easier in the morning, even if life has not changed. When we engage with art before sleep, a slow song, a softly told story, or dim light, we unconsciously signal safety to the nervous system. In safety, emotions no longer need to defend themselves. They stop shouting for attention. They simply exist, then quietly blend into the background of experience. Animals teach us this simply. A cat curls in sunlight without reason. Birds fall silent at night, not because they understand night, but because their bodies sense rest. Their emotions follow biological rhythm, unstrained by interpretation. Jung believed a part of this instinctive wisdom still lives within humans, knowing when to act and when to stop. Before sleep, we do not need to resolve emotions. No analysis, no fixing. We only allow the mind to enter receptive mode where dreams, memory, sound, and image complete the work for us. Emotion, when not forced to change, often finds the gentlest path to settling. And perhaps in that quiet moment, as eyes close and breath slows, we understand what Jung suggested: emotion is not something to overcome, but something to walk alongside. When we walk with it long enough, gently enough, it ceases to be a burden and becomes the quiet ground that supports sleep and waking life beyond it. Part 10. Emotional regulation. A skill that can be learned from Carl Gustav Jung's perspective. Emotional regulation is not an act of forcing the inner world into categories of right or wrong, but an art of slowing down, learning to listen to dialogue with, and to guide the emotional currents within. Modern life often teaches us to control emotions quickly, to extinguish them before they cause trouble. Jung believed the opposite emotions, pleasant or difficult, are the language of the unconscious. To erase them is to silence an important message. Emotional regulation is therefore not about eliminating sadness, suppressing anger, or forcing positivity. It is the ability to remain with emotion long enough in safety for it to unfold and transform. When breath slows, when heart rhythm softens, when the body rests, the nervous system signals that danger has passed. In that moment, emotion no longer needs to shout, it can whisper. Small acts, deep breathing, gentle walking, sitting quietly directly affect the biology of emotion. Body and psyche are inseparable. Jung emphasized that the soul speaks through the body, and the body responds through emotion. Changing breath changes signals to the brain. Gentle movement releases trapped nervous energy. Meditation appears as doing nothing, yet that nothing creates space for inner self-regulation. One of the most important shifts in regulation is when emotion stops being a command and becomes data. Instead of, I must act because I am anxious, we notice anxiety is present. This small distance changes everything. Jung called this the beginning of consciousness, when we are no longer swept away but stand beside the current. Here, emotion no longer unconsciously controls behavior. We neither fight it nor follow it. We allow it to exist as a psychological phenomenon that comes and goes. This permission is often what calms it fastest. Like a child, emotion often only needs to be seen, not corrected. Repetition is essential. Each time we respond with gentleness rather than tension, a new neural pathway forms. At first, faint easily, overridden by old reflexes. Over time, through quiet nights, slow breaths, stillness, the pathway strengthens. The brain learns emotion does not equal danger. When this belief settles, the nervous system relaxes even before consciousness intervenes. Jung believed maturity does not mean lacking strong emotions, but being able to contain them. Regulation is not a destination but a lifelong process, not promising permanent calm, but the ability to return to balance, like a lake that ripples yet remains deep. At night, when the body is tired and consciousness loosens, this practice becomes most natural. No complex technique, just lying still, sensing breath, letting leftover emotions drift like clouds across the night sky. You need do nothing. Your gentle presence is enough. In this state, emotion becomes lullaby rather than storm. Perhaps this is what Jung hoped humanity would learn. When we stop fighting the inner world, it restores its own order. Looking closer, regulation does not occur when we do it right, but in how we treat ourselves when we are not okay. The unconscious responds not to commands but to attitude. Approach emotion with tension, it tightens. With curiosity and kindness, it opens. Regulation is not perfection, it is relationship. Many ancient cultures ask not, "How do I stop being sad?" but "What does sadness want to say?" This shift changes everything. When emotion becomes message, not error, the nervous system moves from defense to receptivity. Breath deepens, shoulders drop. These small changes are the biological foundation of calm. Repetition, Jung taught, is the unconscious's language. The unconscious learns through rhythm. Each night you breathe slowly. Each time you allow emotion without judgment, you teach the psyche an ancient lesson. Everything passes. Repeated enough, this lesson becomes wordless, a baseline sense of safety. This process requires no great effort. In fact, it often begins when effort stops. When we stop trying to fix emotion or improve ourselves immediately, the nervous system finally rests. Jung called this the ego stepping aside, allowing deeper self-regulation to occur. Before sleep, as light softens and the world slows, we move closer to the unconscious. This is when new neural pathways are easiest to strengthen. No need to review the day. Just feel the body on the bed breath, evening out emotions, drifting like distant waves. If something heavy appears, do not push it away. Let it sit like a quiet guest in a dark room. No conversation needed. Just leave the door unlocked. In silence, emotion often finds its own exit or at least lowers its voice. Perhaps the deepest gift of regulation is not becoming calmer, but becoming less afraid of ourselves. When emotion is no longer a threat, sleep arrives more easily. Not because problems are solved, but because the mind knows it can stay with whatever arises. Tonight, you do not need to perform, only to be present. Emotion will do its work, and as you drift into sleep, new neural pathways, softer, slower, safer, continue to form quietly, one breath at a time. Part 11. Emotions. Across the stages of life. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, emotions do not remain fixed in a single form. They move, mature, and transform alongside the life of the psyche through each stage of existence. Like layers of sediment beneath the earth, the emotions of every age carry their own color, their own rhythm, and their own meaning. When we listen to them with gentleness, we do not only understand who we are now, but also touch very ancient parts within ourselves. In childhood, emotions arrive like great waves. Children do not yet have psychological walls to soften or shield inner experience. Joy fills the entire body. So does sorrow. The child's brain is still forming and restructuring. The regions responsible for emotional regulation are not yet complete. As a result, every experience enters the nervous system directly. like exposed electrical current. Jung believed that at this stage the ego is still thin, so the outer world easily floods the inner one. This is why childhood is the most fertile ground for deep emotional imprints, both nurturing and wounding. In adolescence, emotions are not only intense, but contradictory. The brain enters another major restructuring phase. Emotional centers develop faster than regions responsible for control and regulation. This often causes adolescents to feel before they understand, to react before they can think. Jung saw in this stage a fierce dialogue between the unconscious and the emerging ego. Emotions here are not merely reactions. They are attempts at identity seeking. Who am I? Where do I belong? Am I accepted? This intensity, though exhausting at times, becomes the fuel for later psychological maturity. As adulthood begins, many people notice that emotions seem to settle, not because they disappear, but because the nervous system has learned how to hold and contain them. Experience, failure, relationships, and repetition help the brain build more stable regulatory pathways. We are no longer swept away as quickly by each emotional wave. Jung described this as the stage in which the ego has grown strong enough to stand between the outer world and the inner flow of the unconscious. Yet this stability does not always mean peace. Sometimes it is merely a surface layer covering emotions that have not yet been touched. It is here the trauma often reveals itself quietly. Trauma is not only painful memory, but the binding of emotion, sensation, and time. A scent, a sound, a familiar quality of light can awaken old emotions the ego believes it has forgotten. Jung noted that the unconscious does not forget in the human sense. It waits for the right moment to speak. Thus, in adulthood, emotions may appear disproportionate to the present, not because we are weak, but because something very old within us is seeking recognition. Over time, if we enter sufficiently safe relationships, the nervous system begins to relearn what it once missed. The feeling of calm in the presence of another, a non-judgmental gaze, a slow voice, a presence that lasts, these are all healing signals. Jung believed that the deepest healing does not come from intellectual insight, but from new emotional experience repeated often enough. Only then does the unconscious begin to rewrite old stories in a gentler rhythm. In later stages of life, emotions often take on deeper, quieter tones, less explosive but more profound. Sadness may blend with acceptance. Joy may carry stillness. Jung called this process individuation, the gradual integration of the soul's many parts. Emotions are no longer opponents but guides. We begin to understand that every emotion that appeared had its reason, each contributing to bringing us here. At night, when the body is tired and the outer world grows quiet, the emotional layers of an entire lifetime also soften. You do not need to revisit every memory or repair every stage. It is enough to know that your nervous system has traveled a long way. It has learned, adapted, endured, and protected you in the best ways it could. Now, as you lie down, all those stages may rest together. The inner child, the storm-filled youth, the adult learning to let go, all have a place in this quiet. And when sleep arrives, it is not merely the end of a day, but a moment when your entire emotional history is allowed to pause safely in the gentle darkness of night. When Jung spoke of the human life journey, he did not see stages as mere biological milestones, but as cycles of psychological transformation. Each cycle carries its own emotional tone, its own way the nervous system learns to exist in the world. When we look back with gentleness, we see that emotions were never wrong at any stage. They were simply doing their work appropriate to their time. Many adults carry a difficult-to-name feeling: fatigue without clear cause, sadness without explanation, emptiness, even when life appears fine. Jung understood this as a sign of misalignment between the current ego and unconscious parts that were never fully heard. These emotions often do not belong to the present, but are echoes of earlier stages that were never allowed full expression. The brain may have matured, but the nervous system still holds emotional memory from times when it needed protection and recognition. In midlife, many experience a subtle emotional shift. Goals that once felt urgent lose their intensity. Deeper questions emerge quietly, persistently. Have I lived true to myself? What parts of me were left behind? Jung did not see this as crisis, but as invitation. Emotions at this stage turn inward slower, like evening light rather than midday sun. They no longer demand action. They invite reflection. Biologically, the nervous system also changes. Emotional reactions may not erupt as quickly as in youth, but if neglected, they can accumulate silently. Many learn to endure very well, but forget how to feel. Jung reminded us that suffering comes not from strong emotion, but from disconnection from one's own emotion. When feelings are suppressed too long, they do not vanish. They transform into fatigue, vague anxiety, or loss of meaning. In later life, if enough safety and time are available, emotions begin to carry a quality of reconciliation. Not all sorrow is resolved, but much of it no longer needs resistance. Jung described this as the stage where the ego stops trying to control the unconscious and learns to dialogue with it. Emotion becomes less like waves and more like a slow river, still deep but no longer overwhelming. One essential point Jung emphasized is that we do not mature by discarding emotions from earlier stages, but by carrying them with greater understanding. The fearful child, the uncertain youth, the responsible adult, all are layers of the same person. When acknowledged, they stop demanding attention through pain. Sleep is where this reconciliation happens most naturally. As consciousness rests, the unconscious begins its work of connecting emotional fragments across a lifetime. The brain does not care how old you are. It knows only that you have lived, felt, and tried. Sleep allows the entire system to lower its defenses, breathe, and return to a primal sense of safety. So if tonight you feel multiple emotional layers within you, today's fatigue, yesterday's sadness, and something much older, you do not need to untangle them. You only need to know that all these emotions belong to a life fully lived. They are not here to harm you. They are here to tell your story. And as you close your eyes, you are not only entering the sleep of the present moment, but the rest of an entire emotional lifetime. Here, all stages may lie down together, without conflict or urgency. Only slow, steady breath remains, and the feeling that at least for now, everything is safe enough to rest. Part 12. Core emotions. Anger, shame, guilt, love, gratitude. From Carl Gustav Jung's perspective, core emotions are not good or bad states to be controlled, but foundational forces of psychic life shaped to help humans survive, connect, and find meaning. Anger, shame, guilt, love, and gratitude, though seemingly different, are ancient languages through which the mind speaks to us about boundaries, relationships, and values. When listened to with gentleness, they cease to be burdens and become wisdom. Anger, in Jung's view, is not aggression to be suppressed, but a signal protecting boundaries. It appears when something important within us feels violated, dismissed, or threatened. At its most primitive level, anger serves survival. It says, "Stop, enough." The problem lies not in anger itself, but in whether we are allowed to feel it consciously. When anger is suppressed too long, it does not disappear. It transforms into fatigue, bitterness, or self-blame. Jung believed that anger, when understood properly, becomes clear energy, helping us know what matters and what must be protected. Shame is subtle and easily misunderstood. It is not simply the feeling of, "I did something wrong," but the fear of being excluded from the group. In evolutionary history, exclusion meant danger. Thus, shame evolved as a mechanism to protect social belonging. Jung saw shame as two-sided. It helps regulate behavior within community, but when excessive, it turns us against ourselves. When shame is not softened by understanding, it becomes, "I am the problem," rather than "I encountered a problem." Distinguishing between the two is the first step toward nervous system rest. Guilt is often confused with shame, yet it points in a different direction. Guilt focuses on action, not identity. It arises when we recognize having harmed someone or strayed from our values. Jung viewed guilt as repair-oriented, not punitive. When listened to properly, it leads to apology, adjustment, reconnection. When distorted, it becomes endless self-punishment. Healing lies in allowing guilt to complete its function and then be released. Love, in Jungian psychology, is not only romantic feeling but a force that organizes meaning. Love directs attention. We notice what we love, care for it, and allow it to shape our inner world. Jung believed love bridges ego and unconscious, the personal self, and something larger. In love, the ego loosens its isolation and touches unity. In safety, love calms the nervous system. Breath slows, belonging emerges, laying essential groundwork for deep sleep. Gratitude is often overlooked because of its quietness. Yet for Jung, gratitude is powerful social glue. It strengthens trust that the world is not wholly hostile, that support still exists. Gratitude does not deny pain. It simply opens space to notice what sustains us, even in exhaustion. Physiologically, gratitude softens the sympathetic nervous system, guiding the body toward rest and recovery. It need not be grand. Sometimes it is only the warmth of an exhale or the quiet presence of a safe night. When these 5 emotions are viewed together, they reveal themselves not as opposites but as complements. Anger guards boundaries. Shame regulates belonging. Guilt repairs misalignment. Love creates meaning. Gratitude strengthens connection. Together they form a complete emotional ecosystem, allowing humans not only to survive, but to live deeply. Jung did not advise eliminating difficult emotions, but dialoguing with them as loyal messengers, sometimes awkward but well-intentioned. At night, as light softens and the world slows, these emotions may rest. You do not need to resolve each one before sleep. It is enough to know they have worked all day, protecting you, connecting you, guiding you. Now you may gently set them down like heavy coats beside the bed. In this stillness, anger need not speak, shame need not hide, guilt need not repeat. Love remains, and gratitude whispers softly. The nervous system senses that all is safe enough to rest, and when sleep comes, it does not erase emotion, it holds it all within one deep, slow, peaceful breath. At a deeper level, Jung believed these core emotions belong not only to the individual, but to the collective unconscious humanity's shared psychological memory. When you feel anger, shame, or gratitude, you are touching ancient patterns that once helped humans survive across millennia. This is why emotion often precedes reason, and why it arises before naming. Seen this way, anger is no longer a flaw to fix, but a knock from protective instinct. Sometimes, simply acknowledging "I am angry because this matters" is enough for the nervous system to cool. Jung believed emotions that are seen regulate themselves. Those denied find other ways to speak. At night, when defenses loosen, anger may surface in memory or imagery, only to be recognized and quietly dissolve. Shame behaves similarly. It whispers softly, urging withdrawal. Yet beneath it lies the fear of abandonment. When met with gentleness, its sharpness softens. In sleep's safety, shame no longer needs to hide. It may rest with you. Guilt, when not prolonged into punishment, becomes a delicate moral compass. It tells us what truly matters. Jung believed that once an emotion completes its task, it naturally withdraws. Thus, if you have understood and learned what was needed, guilt does not need to stay. Night is a fitting time to whisper, "I understand now. I may rest." Love at depth is quiet. It does not demand expression. It functions like inner gravity, holding disparate parts together. Even the memory of love, a gaze, a voice, shifts the body. Immediately shoulders soften, heart steadies, breath deepens. Jung saw this as the ego no longer straining, because it feels held by something larger, and gratitude so fitting before sleep. Gratitude does not require satisfaction with everything. It only invites recognition that amid complexity something has carried you this far. Perhaps the bed beneath you, perhaps steady breath, perhaps simply being heard. Jung believed gratitude is one of the shortest bridges from vigilance to rest. When these 5 emotions sit side by side, a soft inner order becomes felt. None must be removed. None must be amplified. They arrive, do their work, and may leave like day and night, waking and sleeping, each with its rhythm. So before sleep, you do not need to be okay or positive. You only need to allow the emotions of the day to be set down. They have fulfilled their roles. Now the mind may step back, the body may grow heavy, and the soul may drift into the safe quiet of night. Part 13. Meaning, values, and emotional wisdom. If we listen long enough, we begin to realize that emotions do not arrive by chance. They are not sudden gusts of wind passing through the mind, but subtle signals telling us that some value within us has just been touched. When we feel sad, it may be because something meaningful has been lost. When we feel angry, it may be because an important boundary has been crossed. When we feel joy, it is often because in that moment the world aligns with what we cherish. According to Carl Gustav Jung, emotions are the natural language through which the unconscious speaks about meaning in life long before reason has time to explain. In everyday life, we tend to judge emotions by how pleasant or unpleasant they feel. But if we look more deeply, we see that every emotion is connected to a core value. Anxiety often relates to safety. Hurt is tied to connection. Pride touches the value of competence and contribution. When an emotion appears, it is quietly asking, what truly matters to you right now? Simply pausing to listen to that question is already an act of inner care. Jung believed that wisdom does not come from eliminating emotions, but from placing them in their proper context. An emotion detached from context can become a storm, intense, confusing, and overwhelming. But when we ask, where does this emotion come from? What is it protecting? Does it belong to the present, or does it carry an old memory? That same emotion begins to change its shape. It gains boundaries. It gains history. It gains a reason to exist. And because of that, it no longer needs to shout. Emotional intelligence in this sense is not the ability to stay calm at all times or to react appropriately. It is the ability to remain with an emotion long enough to understand its message without becoming completely identified with it. Jung called this process differentiation, when the ego learns to step back slightly to observe emotion rather than be swallowed by it. This is a skill that can be cultivated not in a short course, but throughout an entire lifetime. Each time we recognize that an emotion reflects a value, we add another layer of understanding about ourselves. We begin to see more clearly what truly matters and what is merely noise. From there, decisions become less rushed. We no longer react simply to end discomfort, but can act to care for the core value that has been touched. This is the moment when emotion transforms into wisdom. At night, when the body is tired and consciousness less vigilant, emotions often appear more clearly. Not to disturb sleep, but to remind us that something during the day has touched us. If we push them away, they may return in dreams as images, symbols, or vague sensations. But if we listen with gentleness, they usually soften very quickly. Because the purpose of emotion is not to stay forever, but to be understood. As emotional wisdom forms, emotions are no longer enemies to be controlled. They become inner signposts, pointing, not forcing, suggesting, not commanding. We may still feel sadness, anger, fear, love, but we are no longer lost inside them. We know that behind every emotion lies a need, a value, a deeply human part seeking care. In this state, inner life becomes softer. There are fewer inner battles. We no longer need to constantly fix ourselves. We simply listen, adjust, and allow. Jung believed that when people live more harmoniously with their emotions, they move closer to wholeness, not perfection, but agreement among their inner parts. And perhaps this is the most fitting state to carry into sleep. When emotions are no longer storms, but small guiding lights. When meaning is no longer something to be chased, but something that slowly reveals itself through listening. You do not need to understand every emotion right now. It is enough to know they have a reason for existing and that you are learning to understand them little by little, very slowly, very humanly. When we begin to see emotions as loyal messengers, we stop slamming the door every time an uncomfortable one knocks. We understand they do not come to ruin our lives, but to show us where attention is needed. Some values may have been neglected too long. Some needs may have been compressed because we thought we had to be stronger, more reasonable, more okay. But the unconscious does not operate by social standards. It operates by inner truth, and emotion is the shortest path for that truth to speak. Carl Jung emphasized that wisdom does not come from avoiding the shadow, but from bringing the light of awareness into it. In the realm of emotion, that light is not cold analysis, but gentle curiosity. When we allow ourselves to ask, what does this emotion want me to understand? Even the heaviest emotions begin to change in intensity, not because they are forced to disappear, but because they have been seen. An important aspect of emotional wisdom is distinguishing between present emotion and emotional memory. Many strong reactions in the present actually carry echoes of the past. The brain and nervous system do not always clearly separate now from then. When a situation triggers an old feeling, the emotion rises with the full weight of its history. Emotional wisdom does not deny this reaction. It gently places it back in its proper timeline. This allows the emotion to return to the size of the present moment. As inner values become clearer, we begin to live more consistently. We no longer feel vaguely empty because we understand why certain choices exhaust us, while others, even small ones, bring a quiet sense of rightness. When listened to, emotions help us align life with true values, not just external expectations. This is a very quiet process, but a lasting one. At night, as life slows, emotional wisdom reveals itself most clearly. Loud thoughts fade, and the body begins to speak. A heaviness in the chest, a gentle tension in the belly, a sadness without a clear cause. These are whispers. We do not need to solve them now. Simply acknowledging, "I hear you," is often enough for the nervous system to relax a little more. When emotions are treated as information, they no longer need to escalate to be noticed. They become more cooperative, more precise. We slowly learn to live with emotions rather than against them. And in that state, wisdom is no longer something achieved through effort, but a natural outcome of long listening. Perhaps the deepest emotional wisdom is not always knowing what we feel, but trusting that whatever we feel, we can stay with it. That trust brings a profound sense of safety. And that sense of safety is exactly what the body needs before sleep. So if there is still an unnamed emotion within you right now, there is no need to rush. You can let it rest there like a small note for tomorrow. Tonight, it is enough to know that your emotions have meaning and that you are learning to understand them slowly, gently. That is enough to close the day and to let sleep arrive naturally. Part 14. Emotions are information, and information can become wisdom. Emotions do not arise from nothing. They always begin quietly in the body. A small change in heart rhythm, a tightening in the chest, a wave of warmth or coolness in the belly. Before the mind forms words, the body already knows. From Carl Gustav Jung's perspective, this is the deep layer where the unconscious communicates with consciousness, not through logic, but through living sensation. Emotion, therefore, is not something we create, but something that is sent. As emotion rises into the mind, it is gradually woven into a story. The human mind does not tolerate meaninglessness, so it tries to explain, why am I sad? Why am I uneasy? Why do I feel love or anger? These stories help us orient ourselves in the world, understand who we are, where we stand, and what matters. But this is also where emotion can be misunderstood, especially when we are tired, stressed, or overwhelmed. Jung emphasized that the danger is not emotion itself, but our unconscious identification with the story emotion creates. When that happens, emotion stops being information and becomes command. We act, react, and judge ourselves without realizing that emotion is simply trying to protect us or connect us to something deeper. Anxiety may be a reminder of vulnerability. Anger may be the call of a violated boundary. Sadness may signal a value left unattended. At the deepest level, emotions always carry a positive intention. They protect us from danger, help us bond, and keep us sensitive to meaning. But when the body is exhausted, when sleep is lacking, when life moves too fast, emotions can become distorted. They speak louder than necessary, use extreme imagery, and convince us that everything is more serious than it truly is. This is not the fault of emotion, it is a sign that the nervous system needs rest. When emotions are listened to properly, their role begins to change. From turbulent waves, they become streams of information. We stop asking, "How do I get rid of this emotion?" and instead ask, "What is this emotion pointing me toward?" That change of question opens the door to wisdom. Wisdom does not come from controlling emotion, but from staying with it without being swept away. Emotional wisdom at its deepest level is understanding that emotions do not demand immediate action. They only ask to be recognized. Like a signal light on a dashboard, it tells you something is happening, but it is not the problem itself. When we learn to pause, breathe slowly, and feel the body emotions begin to soften, not because we silence them, but because they have been heard. At night, this wisdom becomes especially important. Night is when defenses thin, and the unconscious moves closer to awareness. Unprocessed emotions from the day may visit, but you do not need to do anything with them. You do not need to understand everything, solve anything, or draw conclusions right now. It is enough to know that your emotions are information, and information can wait until tomorrow. Right now, as you listen, your body may already feel a little heavier, your breath a little slower. That is a sign of safety. You can allow emotions to release their role as guides and let a deeper wisdom, the wisdom of the body of sleep, take over. As Jung trusted, the unconscious is not an enemy, but a quiet guardian working while we rest. So tonight, you do not need to carry every story into sleep. You can leave them here. Emotion has completed its task. Wisdom has been planted like a seed. The rest lets sleep finish. You are safe. You are allowed to rest, and every emotion can wait until you wake. When you allow yourself to stop here, no more analysis, no more digging, something subtle begins to happen. Your nervous system realizes it no longer needs to stay alert. There are no tasks to complete, no problems to solve, no emotions to fix. In that moment, emotion returns to its natural place, a slow-moving stream of information without urgency, without demand. Carl Jung said that the deepest part of the human mind does not operate through reason, but through symbol, rhythm, and image. Sleep is the space where that language is used most fully. When you stop trying to understand emotion, it begins to organize itself. The knots of daytime soften into gentle movements at night. Feelings without words are stored safely in the unconscious, like seeds resting in dark soil. You may notice that even without effort, your body is caring for you. The heart adjusts itself, breathing deepens, muscles release in ways you do not have to think about during the day. This is not giving up, it is trust. Trust that a part of you knows how to restore itself without instruction. In this moment, emotion does not need to be right or wrong. It only needs permission to exist. And when it exists quietly, it slowly dissolves into a background of safety. Not disappearing, but no longer taking up all the space. Like distant sound at night, still there, but no longer demanding attention. If any emotion remains a small worry, a faint echo, you do not need to push it away. Simply place it beside you like a light object on a table. You do not need to carry it into sleep. You do not need to explain it to anyone. Tomorrow in the light, you may see it differently. Now everything is slow enough, quiet enough, safe enough. And you can allow sleep to arrive in the most natural way, not summoned, not forced, simply invited. Just as emotions, when listened to properly, soften, sleep will find you. As we reach the final moments of this journey, you do not need to carry any concepts with you. No definitions to remember. No need to organize what you heard or wonder if you understood it correctly. Because emotions, like sleep, do not require grasping. They only ask to be allowed, and then they find their way back to balance. Carl Jung believed that the deepest part of the human being speaks not through logic but through rhythm, and night is the most primal rhythm of the mind. As light fades and external stimulation quiets, the nervous system shifts from doing to being. In this moment, emotions no longer need to prove anything. They are no longer problems to solve, but messengers who have finished their work. Today you may have moved through many states: fatigue, confusion, anticipation, disappointment, or a very small, steady joy. All of it is valid. No emotion arrives by chance. Each carries a message, but that message does not need to be read right now. Night is not for analysis, it is for restoration. As you lie still, the body begins doing what it has evolved to do for thousands of years: self-regulate. Heart rate slows. Breath deepens. Brain regions responsible for vigilance and control gradually give way to those of memory, imagery, and dreaming. Emotion is no longer waves rising and falling, but a calm surface reflecting the inner sky. If one emotion still remains a question unanswered, a worry not fully gone, you do not need to remove it. Let it rest like a small stone at the bottom of a river. The water keeps flowing. Sleep still comes. And that stone will be smoothed over time, not by effort, but by the patient movement of the current. Sleep does not ask you to become a better version of yourself. It only asks you to stop. Stop trying to understand. Stop trying to fix. Stop trying to be okay. In that stopping, a deeper wisdom begins to work, the wisdom of the body, the unconscious, the part of the mind that existed before language. And perhaps the most relaxing thing you can hear before sleep is not a new truth, but this reminder: you are already enough. No more effort is needed today. You do not need to carry any emotion into tomorrow. If what you have heard has helped you slow down even a little, feel safer, even a little, or feel quietly understood, that is the purpose of Stories for Sleep. This channel was created not to teach, but to accompany you in moments when rest is most needed, when the mind does not have to be strong, only still. If you would like to continue these gentle journeys, exploring emotion, dreams, the unconscious and human depth through the lens of Carl Jung, you are invited to subscribe to Stories for Sleep. Each subscription is a quiet reminder to yourself that sleep, rest, and your inner life deserve care. And now there is nothing more you need to do. Simply close your eyes, let your breath guide you, and let your emotions rest with you. Sleep deeply, sleep peacefully, and I will meet you again in another gentle sleep.